Today, we're in Isaiah. We're looking at what's called the third servant song, Isaiah chapter 50, starting in verse 4. And the previous two have focused on what's essentially the audience for the servant, the mission of the servant. And we've seen how many times, both Israel and the Messiah are ones that figure in those different roles. Sometimes what they say are interchangeable. Sometimes it's hard to tell which one he's talking about. But many times we've looked at the Aramaic, the Targums, and it's identified that Jewish thought has said, hey, this is talking about the Messiah. And what's interesting when you were reading the previous passages here in Isaiah, both Israel and the nations, the Gentiles, were supposed to listen to the servant. Because the servant, unlike Israel has been oftentimes throughout much of this book, unlike Israel, the servant will be faithful to the covenant. The servant is the one who's going to fulfill the mission, and that part of that mission, which is what it was intended to be for the whole people, but the servant especially will be to fulfill the mission to be the light to the Gentiles and take God's Torah to them. Right? This third song describes several important ways what the servant will be like. What's the servant going to be like, and how is he going to be received? One thing we need to come to terms with is that the servant that gets described in these passages isn't necessarily going to meet everybody's expectations or what they would like this servant, the Messiah, to do, or what people thought he did, or the popular theology. What people thought the popular theology, or the accepted theology of the day, the dominant perspective of the day, isn't necessarily right. Y'all do realize that just because something is popular or mainstream or accepted by everybody, that doesn't necessarily mean it's true. Y'all realize that? Yes? No? Y'all are quiet today. Must be too much vegetarian chili or something that got everybody so quiet. But no, it's just because something is popular. There's been a lot of popular ideas and theologies and interpretations go through just in our own lifetimes, right? And some of them you were able to look at and say, I don't buy that one, and you could tell it's off right from the start. Other ones you have to sit and think about for a while before you can figure out, I don't think that one's right. And then sometimes years later when you realize, wow, I didn't realize how far off the way I got when I accepted that particular interpretation. So again, this one is describing often what the servant looks like and how he's going to be received. And there are many ways some shattered expectations. When you look at the Jewish people in the Second Temple era, in that first century, they had high hopes, they had high expectations of the Messiah, for the Messiah. They were waiting on one hand, for the prophet, the one who was like unto Moses, who would come in and almost dazzle everybody with the miracles like Moses did, deliver them from the slavery of this great power. And on another hand, they were waiting for the one who would come in the spirit and the power of Elijah, who would confront and defeat the idolatry that was so rampant in the people, that Messiah would push the people to repentance and no longer be willing to waver between faithfulness and unfaithfulness, whether it's Baal or God or some other god and him. And lastly, on the third hand, in some respects, they were expecting that heroic Davidic king who would come and sit on the throne in Jerusalem and subdue all of their enemies, particularly the Romans, who occupied their land like a plague of locusts. They had high expectations. They had high hopes. The fellow who would meet those kinds of expectations would have to be pretty impressive, right? He would have to be, have the power and the influence of Moses, the boldness and courage of Elijah, the majesty and the kingliness of David. Such a man is going to have extensive, charisma. Everybody's going to be flocking to him to hear his words. He's going to be unmistakable, majestic. Everyone will be hanging on his every word. And so the servant that fulfills all of that, this Messiah is going to be great, and he's going to usher in a new era for the nation of Israel and for all the nations, for the Jewish people, by defeating the foreign rule, sitting on the throne of David and enforcing this perfect Torah. Those concepts were very popular. They were the dominant perspective of the day. They were even concepts and ideas that I would be more than comfortable saying are true. But they don't necessarily hold the whole story, do they? They show the end. They show the final chapters of the story, so to speak, but not the entire journey of what it took to get there. It'd be like reading the part, think about Joseph, the life of Joseph from the book of Genesis. Think about reading the part of his story when he is the regent, when he is second in command of Egypt, and second only to Pharaoh. And if that's all you know of his story, if that's all you think about, you think that the rest of his story, nothing else really important happens, nothing else really matters. Are you missing something if that's all you know of Joseph? Yeah, you're missing something. You're missing all of the hardship that it took for him to get there. You're missing all of the ways that God intervened and delivered to bring him to the place where he would be elevated to that second in command of Egypt. Because this servant song begins to paint a different story. A servant who is a teacher, is a disciple, to direct people back to God and his ways. It says in Isaiah chapter 50, verse 4, the beginning of that says, Adonai Elohim has given me the tongue of the learned, the tongue of a disciple. The previous one had said had talked about the servant wielding the sword from his mouth. This servant doesn't just wield the double-edged sword as a warrior, as a man of war, or a conquering king. He's not just a brute in that respect. He is much more like Jacob. He has the tongue of the learned. He's like Jacob, who stayed among the tents, one who was receiving the instructions from his father, receiving that from Isaac, receiving that even from Abraham, who was still alive, for the first 15 years or so of his life. Jacob had been learning from great men of God. And this servant in Isaiah 50 is someone who speaks with that kind of voice. He speaks as one who is a true follower and disciple of God. He speaks as somebody who has the best education of the day. And the source of that is God himself. It says, Adonai Elohim has given me the tongue of the learned. So that means he is someone who is educated in what was received from God, the Word of God, the Torah itself. The scribes and the teachers of the Torah were held in high esteem and respect, even in Yeshua's day. And this servant is speaking, and it's going to be obvious that he has a special knowledge and relationship with God's Torah, because he got it from him directly. When you look into the life of Yeshua as Messiah, he displayed this kind of knowledge at a very young age. And when he was 12 years old, about the age preparing for his bar mitzvah and such, after attending Passover in Jerusalem, his family packed up to go home, and Yeshua stays behind. Mom and Dad kind of freak out a little bit for a few days because he's not on anywhere where they can find him. Luke chapter 2, it says, after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting in the center of the teachers. So if he's in the center of the teachers, he's in the middle of what all the adults and all the teachers are doing. And in a lot of respects, since he's sitting in the center of them, they're all focused on him and what he's saying. They're evaluating him and how well does this kid know this stuff. I wouldn't feel comfortable with that kind of attention like today. Would anybody else want to be surrounded by a group of the experts in the Torah, and they're quizzing you on that? He is at the center of the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. You can learn a lot more from how much somebody knows, not just upon the answers that they give, but the kind of questions that they ask. Because then all those hearing him were astonished at his understanding and his answers. Later in that same chapter, verse 52, it says, as he was growing, back home, it says, Yeshua kept increasing in wisdom and stature and in favor with men, with God and with men. So he didn't peak at 12. He kept going. And people were always amazed at Yeshua's teaching and understanding. It was always some kind of new teaching or new kind of authority, not like the teachers that they were used to. Y'all remember, can y'all think back to when you were in school? Some of you still are. But can y'all think back to your time in school and you remember one teacher who was so much better than everybody else? You have one of those that you can look back on, or were they all bad? How many they were all bad? Nobody had them all bad? And Mariah, you're homeschooled. You really only had one teacher, so you don't go there. But the one teacher that's so much different and so much better than all the rest can make all the difference on a particular subject or whatever else. Yeshua was like that. In Luke chapter 4, it says, Yeshua came down to Capernaum, a town in the Galilee. He was teaching them on Shabbat, and they were astounded at his teaching because his message had authority. He had learned it from the original, from the source. He had learned it like Jacob. He has a tongue of the learned, a tongue of a disciple who does things exactly as his rabbi, his teacher, would do. And then he's able to speak exactly the words that his teacher had shown him and taught him. That was the Jewish method. You sat under a rabbi, you sat under a teacher, and you learned everything that they learned. You did everything the way that they did them, and you taught them exactly as you were taught. In John chapter 5, Yeshua answered them, Amen, amen, I tell you, the Son cannot do anything by himself. He can do only what he sees the Father doing. Adonai Elohim, the one who had taught him. Whatever the Father does, the Son does likewise. He is the disciple of the Father. For the Father loves the Son and shows him everything he does. He will show him even greater works than these, so that you will be amazed. Verse 49 of chapter 12, he says, For I did not speak on my own, but the Father himself who sent me has commanded me what to say and speak. And I know that his commandment is life everlasting. Therefore what I say just as the Father has told me. He's repeating what he has learned. Yeshua was educated, given the tongue of the learned, not because he went to the equivalent of Harvard or MIT or the best seminary or the best law school or the best yeshiva or sat under the most famous rabbi, but because of his relationship with the Father, the source of the Torah. Look again at that passage from Isaiah. It says, Adonai Elohim has given me the tongue of the learned, that I may know how to sustain the weary with a word. The purpose of what he has learned, the purpose of this tongue of a disciple, is that he is bringing rest. His teaching brings rest and peace. His yoke is not supposed to be something heavy. His yoke, his teaching is supposed to be easy, and his burden is supposed to be light. Yeshua, when you look at the Gospels, when you look at his life, he so often has compassion for those who have been suffering for a long time, where other people will walk right on past them because, well, nobody seems to be able to help that person. There's a man who was born blind and he's an adult. There's a woman who was bleeding for 12 years, and there's others. He has compassion for those to whom the Torah, or more like the tradition of the fathers, that elements of the oral law that had become such a burden, which the teachers of the law were placing upon them, but not showing or lifting a finger to help them with it. He had compassion upon them. He was willing to give them peace and rest, to sustain the weary with a word. Matthew 23 put it like this. Then Yeshua spoke to the crowds and to his disciples, saying, the Torah scholars and Pharisees sit on the seat of Moses. So whatever they tell you, do and observe. Right? So when they are teaching from the Torah, when they are speaking directly from the Word, that's authority. But don't do what they do, for what they say, they do not do. They tie up heavy loads, hard to carry, and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. He goes on in chapter 23, verse 23. He pronounces these woes throughout this chapter. But woe to you, Torah scholars and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You tithe the mint and dill and cumin, yet you have neglected the weightier matters of the Torah, which were justice, mercy, and faithfulness. It is necessary to do these things without neglecting the others. Is he telling them not to tithe of their spices and all that stuff? No, he's not telling them not to. But he's saying if that's where your emphasis lies, you're missing the more important thing. You're missing the forest for the trees, so to speak. He wants to give rest. He wants to teach them and sustain them, sustain those that have been made weary by his teaching. You look back in Isaiah, it says, Adonai Elohim has given me the tongue of the learned, that I may know how to sustain the weary with a word. He awakens me morning by morning. He awakens my ear to give heed as a disciple. Adonai Elohim has opened my ear, and I was not rebellious, nor did I turn back. So everything that he had been taught, everything he had been shown, the servant did not rebel against, nor did he reject the teaching, nor did he reject the command, the purpose, or the mission that Adonai Elohim had laid upon him. In essence, it wasn't so much about what the servant's will was, but about Adonai's will that needs to be done. Right? You see that in the life of Messiah. Going a little farther, in Matthew 26, he fell face down and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will. Again, a second time he went away and prayed, saying, my Father, if this cannot pass away unless I drink it, let your will be done. The servant does not rebel. He is not disobedient against the plan, against the purpose, against the mission of Adonai. That's what sets this servant apart from the nation and the people of Israel. This is the faithful servant. This is the one who accomplishes that goal. And Yeshua does not rebel against the mission, against the plan, even when he had the opportunity, even when he was given the chance to run, to disappear, to chicken out, because he knows exactly what's coming. He did not take the path that probably every single one of us in this room would take as the way out. The servant is not rebelling against God's will, and even though the servant has the mouth that speaks the truth of God, the servant has the mouth that brings comfort and strength to the weary. He has everything that everybody should want, as Isaiah describes him. You would think that this would bring praise. You would think that that would make the servant popular and accepted. You would think that the world would rejoice and accept the servant with open arms and parades. But no, that's not what happens at all. Even with everything that the servant is doing right in the eyes of God, the servant is still going to experience rejection and hardship. Isaiah chapter 50, verse 6. As soon as he's immediately talking about what he's doing, about how he is not rebellious to the ways, he is not turning back away from the ways. It goes immediately to say, I gave my back to those who strike, and my cheeks to those pulling out my beard. I did not hide my face from humiliation and even spitting. Isaiah, throughout this whole book so far, he's been making the point that unfaithful Israel, the unfaithful servant, will experience hardship. They're going to experience discipline. They're going to experience judgment from the Father. They'll experience the exile and the scattering because of their disobedience and breaking of the terms of the covenant. Over and over again, Isaiah is reminding them that God is justified to do so, that their sin warrants it. And even those nations that God is going to bring against them, like Assyria or like Babylon, those nations that God uses to accomplish those forms of discipline, they're not going to always stay within the boundaries that God gives them. They're going to take things too far, and then God even judges those nations for how they treat Israel. But the faithful servant, on the other hand, when he's doing everything he's supposed to, when he's doing everything right, he gets treated with pain and suffering. The way verse 5, talks about how the servant was not rebellious, how he didn't turn back from the path, it suggests again that the servant knew that this kind of reception and treatment was coming. So because it was the will of Adonai Elohim, the servant didn't turn away from this beating or this whipping of his back. The Hebrew word includes the idea of beating, of slaying, and even killing. He's turning his back. He's opening himself up for that. The first time that word is used is in that terms of being striking. I'm turning my back to those who strike. The first time that's used is that of Cain when he strikes Abel. Did that result in life or death? That was death. The Greek, the Septuagint uses the word mastix, which means whipping or scourging. That's actually where we get the word, y'all know what the word masticate means? That means to chew and kind of grind it up. Right? That's the kind of word that's being used here. That's what the word that was used when the Apostle Paul was about to experience in Acts chapter 22. He was arrested. He was brought into the Romans. They were about to scourge him, and he challenged them saying, is it legal for you to scourge or whip or beat a Roman citizen without due process? That's the word that they understood that as. And then when you're reading about that, about my cheeks to those pulling out my beard, the Septuagint uses the word, instead of pulling out the beard, it uses the word rapisma, which means a blow from a hand or a slap. He didn't run and hide from those who wanted to humiliate him. He didn't run and hide from those who wanted to spit or insult him, from those who would pull his beard out, which would, in many ways, when they do that, that causes your whole face to be disfigured. He essentially, in the midst of all of that, would turn the other cheek. He offered the other side. When someone turns the other cheek, sometimes we struggle with how to apply that in life, right? When someone strikes us or insults us or hurts us, when someone is willing to turn the other cheek, they are showing restraint. Has anybody ever been in that kind of moment where you've had to restrain yourself from striking back? Yeah. It's not that you couldn't strike back. It's not that you didn't have the desire to strike back. So you had the desire, the will, you had the ability, you had the strength, and yet you don't. When Yeshua was being beaten and whipped, when he was being spit on and struck, did he have the ability and the strength and the power to hit back if he wanted to? Oh, yeah. He could have laid waste to the whole room. At his arrest, Yeshua gave a glimpse of what he could do. He said, and suddenly, when he was being arrested, one of those with Yeshua stretched out his hand, drew his sword, and struck the high priest, the Kohen Gadol's servant, cut off his ear. And then Yeshua said to him, "Put your sword back in its place, for all who take up the sword shall perish by the sword." Right? He is showing restraint. Or do you suppose that I cannot call on my Father, and at once he will place at my side 12 legions of angels? Could he put an end to that situation? Could he have stopped his arrest in a moment? Oh, yeah. He chose not to. Yeshua could have ended it right then and there, but he gave that Isaiah passage. He gave his back. He willingly let it happen. No one took his life from him, but he laid it down voluntarily. It says, "For this reason," this is John 10, "the Father loves me because I lay down my life so that I might take it up again. No one takes it away from me, but I lay it down on my own. I have the authority to lay it down, and I have the authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father." So the servant, the faithful servant who is doing everything everything right in the eyes of God, willingly endures and experiences this rejection. He is handed over to the authorities who have the power to sentence those that they consider lawbreakers. And even though the servant was the source of comfort, source of the true Torah, the true light for the darkness of the world, the servant is rejected. John chapter 1 put it like this, the true light coming into the world gives light to every man. He was in the world was made through him. Everything should be good. Everybody should love to have this happen, have this moment come to them. But the world, it says, did not know him. He came to his own, but his own did not receive him, did not recognize him. Much like what happened with Joseph when his brothers appeared before him. They didn't recognize him. But even though the servant was treated so badly, even though he was rejected and not received, and by all accounts of human wisdom, he must have been rejected even by God, cursed of God. That's how we would interpret things. But the faithful servant knew something different. The faithful servant knew that what he was doing was right in the eyes of the one who sent him. He knew it was right, and the servant trusted in the mission of the one who sent him. He trusted that the only opinion that matters is Adonai's, is the Lord. He says, "I gave my back to those who strike, my cheeks to those pulling out my beard. I did not hide my face from humiliation and spitting." And this is how he knows. Verse 7, "For Adonai Elohim will help me." He may not have anybody else's help, but Adonai Elohim will help me. Therefore I have not been disgraced. Therefore I have set my face like flint, and I know that I will not be ashamed. The servant, though he is rejected, is not disgraced, nor is he ashamed. He's doing exactly what he knows he's supposed to do. He knows Adonai Elohim will help him, will vindicate him. God's opinion is the one that matters. Pleasing the Father is more important than all the praise of men. If he had been received well, if everybody had accepted him, if everybody rejoiced at his coming, but he wasn't doing the will of God and God was not pleased, which is better? Is it better to be accepted with applause by the world and anger God? Or is it better to anger the whole world and be accepted by God? What good is it, right, if you acquire the whole world, yet you forfeit your soul? Pleasing the Father is more important than all the praise of men. And to accomplish the Father's will, it says that he set his face as flint, or like flint. Both the Septuagint and the Aramaic, they translate this as, I have set my face as strong as a rock. And you actually see that similar type of thing in the life of Yeshua in Luke chapter 9. It says, it came to pass, when the time was come that he should be received up, he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem. I've seen some translations, and I had a hard time finding it, that, basically he set his face toward Jerusalem. He set it as stone. What's interesting when you look at that word, it's sterizo, which is a verb, which means to make stable, firm, set fast, strengthen, or resolve. And that word, as it appears in Isaiah in the Septuagint, is stereos, not stereos, which is what went through my mind the first time when I looked at it. It's not stereos, but it's stereos. It's a family word. It's a related word. This is the verb and the adjective. So Yeshua is setting his face, strengthening, resolving himself. And when it talks about setting his face as flint, where it says that in Isaiah 57, the Septuagint says he set his face as a solid rock. The word there is Petra. Which, if you've been around me long enough, that's the same word that Yeshua used when he's talking to his disciples, to Peter, and he asked them who he is. And he tells Peter, you're the rock, Petros. But upon this rock, Petra, I will build my community, my church, my people. That's the determination of the servant. He is determined, he is resolved, he cannot be moved, he will not show weakness or hesitation, because the servant knows that God will vindicate him. Despite the rejection, despite everything that's going on, Isaiah 50 verse 8 says, the one who vindicates me, he is near. He's not far away. He's not abandoned me. Who will accuse me? Let us stand up to each other. Who is my adversary? Let him confront me. So that word there, where it talks the one who vindicates me, it's the word tzadek or tzadak. His righteousness is near. His justice is near. He who vindicates me is near. Yes, the servant has accusers. Yes, the servant has one who strike him, who accuse him, who say all kinds of things about him. And it's the language of a trial. But even if injustice is going to win the day in the human trial, even if it's an unlawful court, the servant isn't worried. The servant knows that the true judge is near and will announce his judgment. Verse 9 says, see, Adonai Elohim will help me. Who is he who would condemn me? See, they all wear out like a garment. A moth will eat them up. All the servants' accusers, all those who strike him, all those who hit his face or pull out his beard, all of his accusers are going to wear out, decay, and rot away. But the servant will not. The Apostle Peter talked about it like this. He described the trial. He described the proceedings used to convict Yeshua in Acts chapter 2. He is speaking to the crowd that's been gathered there for the Feast of Weeks, the Feast of Shavuot, what we call Pentecost. He says, "Men of Israel, hear these words. Yeshua ha-Nazareti, a man authenticated to you by God with mighty deeds and wonders and signs God performed through him in your midst, as you yourselves know." So there's a lot of witnesses even there. This Yeshua, given over by God's predetermined plan and foreknowledge, nailed to the cross by the hands of lawless men, you kill. But God raised him up. God vindicated him, releasing him from the pains of death, from decay, since it was impossible for him to be held by it. For David says about him, "I saw Adonai always before me, for he is at my right hand, so that I might not be shaken. Therefore my heart was glad, and my tongue rejoiced. Moreover, my body also will live in hope, because you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, or let your Holy One see decay. You have made known to me the paths of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence." So no matter what happens to him, he knows that that's true. Brothers, Peter goes on, he says, "I can confidently tell you that the patriarch David died and was buried, and his tomb is with us to this day." So it couldn't be a prophecy about David. So because he was a prophet and knew God had sworn with an oath to him to seat one of his descendants on his throne, David saw beforehand and spoke of Messiah's resurrection, that he was not abandoned to Sheol, and his body did not see decay. Verse 32, this Yeshua God raised up, and we all are witnesses. Therefore, being exalted to the right hand of God and receiving from the Father the promise of the Ruach HaKodesh, he poured out this, what you now see and hear. That's how he described it. Peter is describing the vindication that set him apart from even his accusers. Because Yeshua is not going to see a decay. He was raised from the grave in the ultimate display of approval and vindication. But all those who have accused them, even though they're still living at the time, most of them, all those who condemn him will eventually die and go down to Sheol. And they will remain there, essentially, until the resurrection. They'll remain there until the time when they will stand before the judge, the one seated on the throne with that double-edged sword, the one to whom all judgment has been entrusted, the one to whom we must all give account. That's Messiah the King. And when his accusers stand before him, it'll be this moment from Zechariah. "And then I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication." Is he willing to show even his accusers mercy? Yeah. "When they will look toward me, whom they pierced, they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only son, and grieve bitterly for him, as one grieves for a firstborn." Even in that day, when true justice is on display, when true Torah is being taught, there's going to even be mercy even then. But all must listen and shema to the servant, the one who sits on the throne. Because all those things that they were expecting, all those things that they had believed about what Messiah was going to do, that's still going to happen. He says, who among you fears Adonai? That's verse 10. Who hears the voice of his servant? Who walks in darkness and has no light? Let him trust in the name of Adonai and lean on his God. That day is coming. That day is very much true. And the servant, the one who is faithful, even though he experiences a time of rejection, even though he experiences a time of accusation, is going to be vindicated. And then all must listen to him and trust in him. And on that day, may we be those that rejoice and celebrate his coming.